The revolution's begun. The time to stand up has come. We are the rocking of the throne. We are the rocking of the throne.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome, one and all. This is the Due Dissidence podcast. My name is Keaton Weiss, and I have here an exclusive interview with the self-proclaimed godfather of the Bernie or Bust movement, Victor Tiffany, who is an activist and an author. Victor, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Keaton. I appreciate this.
Oh, absolutely. I was glad that you reached out. We had not communicated with each other at all past about a week ago, and it was really awesome to get in touch with you. And I'm so glad that you could be here. So you were telling me before we turned the mics on just a moment ago how you sort of came to call yourself the Godfather of Bernie or Bust. How'd that happen?
There was a New York Times essay winning contest, essay contest winner essay published in the New York Times, and it's a 17-year-old girl who will be voting next year for the first time in her life, and she declared herself as part of the Bernie or Bust generation. And I thought, well, that's interesting, a whole generation. That would make me godfather of a generation. So I looked the word up, and I realized godfathers can be people who founded an entire movement. And I realized, oh, my goodness, I'm godfather of the Bernie or Bust movement. It was just something I stumbled into recently.
Excellent, excellent. And so you were Bernie or Bust last time in 2016. And you are still Bernie or Bust this time. And I think this will be an interesting talk because I myself was essentially Bernie or Bust last time. I did not vote in the general last time. And I, of course, supported
That's
Bernie
not
Sanders.
Bernie or Bust.
Okay.
That's the media versions of Bernie or Bust. Bernie or Bust was very specific, both last time and this time.
Okay, well, go ahead. Tell me what I was then.
I don't know what you were.
Okay,
Bernie
don't tell me what I was. Tell me what
the
Bernie or Bust
write-in
was.
Bernie Sanders last time. That was the original approach, which we came to realize by 2016 was a mistake. We didn't research that strategy. We just ran with it. And then when we started finding out more and more that 7 states don't even have a write-in provision, most of the states that do don't count write-in votes unless the candidate is registered as a write-in candidate. So we basically tried to drop the write-in option, although that was part of Bernie or Bust 2016, and made voting for the Green Party candidate the Bernie or Bust option. This time around, we have no write-in vote. We're not going to repeat the mistakes of 2016.
Hold on 1 second. So you're saying that the Bernie or Bust strategy last time, as you would define it, would be to what? To say beforehand, right? I mean, isn't this so? Because you talk about electoral leverage, right?
Right.
So the point of leverage is to tell the Democratic Party, right? And I'll get into sort of there are kind of 2 different ways to think about the Democratic Party, I think, that we're not going to support the nominee unless it's Bernie Sanders, right? And your version of that last time was to say that we're going to vote for Jill Stein if Bernie is not the nominee.
Or write in Bernie Sanders. We left that option available because so many people had taken the pledge to write him in. By the time we realized what a stupid idea that was, we didn't want to eliminate that as a possibility. But in states like Michigan and Wisconsin, we had no way to measure that. And that was an important part of the strategy, was to be able to measure the consequences of the strategy. So this time, we're not going to promote writing in Bernie Sanders. We know there's still people out there who treat Senator Sanders as a cult of personality, and they're going to write him in anyway. But we can't measure the results of that. And the whole idea is to build a progressive revolution, either within the Democratic Party behind Bernie Sanders, or outside of the Democratic Party behind, this time, either the Green Party or the Justice Party or the Socialist Party. We're not picking which third party Bernie or Busters must vote for, just that it must be a progressive third-party candidate of their choice, or an independent candidate if one were to come around.
Okay, sure. So, all right. So I was, I guess, according to your definition of things, and maybe that is the definition of things, I wasn't quite Bernie or bust, and I didn't really even consider myself Bernie or bust so much as I was not going to vote for Hillary Clinton last time. So, I mean, I guess, I mean, we could parse what Bernie or bust means, but I was essentially going to support Bernie Sanders in the primary, and I made very, very clear to everybody I knew that I wasn't going to support Hillary in the general should she be the nominee. All right. So, I want to ask you about the electoral leverage principle, because I believe I kind of know where you're coming from with this, but I just want to make sure that I know where you're coming from, both for the sake of our audience, so they could be have a good understanding of it, and so that I don't sort of mischaracterize where you're coming from. So go ahead. Explain this concept of electoral leverage.
Because we have the internet and they have the ability to organize outside of the confines of a political party, we have now, with the internet and social media and so forth, the ability to build through a voter pledge a leverage strategy. And Bernie or bust is a strategy. It's not just a slogan. It's not just a temper tantrum. It's not a temper tantrum at all. It is a strategy which says to the Democrats, here's the candidate we will support. We need a revolution, and we'll support this candidate calling for a political revolution only as a Democrat. In other words, if another Democrat wins the nomination, any number of the many neoliberals this time around who are running for the Democratic Party nomination, if any of those neoliberals win the nomination, we're not on board. We are going to vote on November 3rd, 2020, for a progressive come hell or high water. Now, if the Democrats want to defeat Donald Trump, they must understand that the way to do that is to unite the Democratic Party. There's three sections of voters, three classifications of voters who won't vote for anyone but Bernie Sanders this time around. It was true last time, but we didn't understand that for a couple reasons. But the idea is as leverage, and unfortunately, people who stay home and people who vote for Donald Trump, burners who stay home or vote for Donald Trump, are part of the leverage. I mean, it works the same way, but they're not technically Bernie or bust, because this is a very specific revolutionary strategy to get support behind progressives, no matter what. This time around, because of a study by Thomas Piketty, a French political economist who published a study in 2018, we know there are four categories of voters who won't support any candidate, any Democrat, other than Bernie Sanders. These are the Bernie or busters who we're trying to promote. There's also 50% more in 2016 Bernie or Trumpers than there were Bernie or busters. We didn't know that until afterwards.
Yes.
But 12% of Bernie supporters voted for Trump, 8% voted for Jill Stein or wrote in Bernie Sanders or other things like that. So those are two of the four categories. Piketty did an analysis based on 70 years of voting in the United States, England, and France. And he analyzed that poor people, which is the third category of voters, and poorly educated voters, the fourth category of voters, will stay home if there's not someone like Bernie Sanders to support. And in fact, Hillary Clinton lost because a lot of Democrats, like you, stayed home on election day because Hillary Clinton and the neoliberal centrists, centrism, by the way, is a euphemism for neoliberal. These poor people aren't being offered anything by the neoliberals. So they stay home. If it's not a social democrat on the ballot, someone like Bernie Sanders, a democratic socialist, they stay home. So if the Democrats want to defeat Trump, they're going to need the Bernie or busters, they're going to need the Bernie or Trumpers, they're going to need poor people and poorly educated people. And only Bernie Sanders has a 1 million volunteer army. He's already signed them up, who can go out and find these poor people, maybe get them registered if that's what it takes, and literally on election day, this army can arrive at the voter's home and escort them to the polling place in a way that Kamala Harris's supporters just don't have the manpower to do, or Biden supporters. I mean, Democrats have been doing this for years and years, but Bernie literally has the army to get poor people and poorly educated people registered to vote and taken, literally, physically taken in cars, escorted to the polling place to make sure they vote. So do the math. Those four categories of voters aren't going to back a centrist in next year's general election. So if the Democrats want to defeat Trump, there's only one candidate who could pull this off, and that's Bernie Sanders. And that's in part, and of those four categories, I think Bernie or bust is probably the smallest of those categories. Like I said, there's more Bernie or Trumpers, although we would like to recruit them and get them to understand that this is a revolution, that they should vote for a progressive. They have the same effect. They will undermine and divide the neoliberal Democratic Party and see Donald Trump get reelected. It's the same effect, but this way they're actually voting as a revolutionary strategy rather than as a temper tantrum. Well, the Democrats screwed over Bernie Sanders again, so I'm voting for Trump. That's a temper tantrum. That's not what we support at all.
Okay, so I agree with so much of what you just said. All right. And I think you're correct that Bernie Sanders' 1 million, person volunteer army is a true force, and that is not registering in polls right now, because that 1 million volunteer army doesn't make a huge impact until we get closer to when people actually go, because that's a ground game, right? That's where you actually get people to the polls. And I think that's going to prove to be hugely powerful. I do agree with you that I think Bernie has probably the best chance of beating Donald Trump. I don't know if I would say he's the only person who can beat Donald Trump, but I think the grassroots organizing that he's doing right now, that is only going to get bigger and better as these caucuses and primaries get closer, I think is going to prove hugely powerful. And I do think that presidential elections now, especially, are base elections, and I think Bernie can generate, like I just said, this revolutionary excitement that is going to be necessary. You said, but the leverage strategy, though, and you said this phrase twice, is predicated upon whatever, 7 or 8 words you said, if the Democrats want to defeat Donald Trump. Now, there's no question that I think Democratic voters, by and large, want to defeat Donald Trump. I think the Democratic party establishment would rather defeat Donald Trump than lose to Donald Trump. However, I think the Democratic Party establishment would rather lose to Donald Trump than have Bernie Sanders win and become president. And that's where this leverage argument somewhat fails for me, because yes, I mean, you could say you have leverage over the voters, but I notice you follow some people in the movement for a People's Party. And I actually had Nick Brana from the show on a few months ago. And I'll refer our listeners and yourself. I think it's episode 10 that we did. And Nick is a great guy, and he's a co-founder of MPP. And Nick Brana is not some disaffected lefty who decided on a whim he's going to start a third party. Nick worked for Terry McAuliffe, John Kerry, Barack Obama, and then when he worked for Bernie Sanders, he was the man in charge of trying to convince Democratic superdelegates, which for our listeners, I'm sure most of you guys know this, but those are, the mayors, the congresspeople, the governors, right? The Democratic heavy hitters. He was trying to convince them to vote for Bernie Sanders. So Nick is in a unique position. If there's one man on earth who knows that the Democrats would rather lose to Trump than have Bernie Sanders win, it's Nick. And Nick said that explicitly, unequivocally on this show. And so I don't know how much leverage we have over them. And this is a depressing thing to think, because I think, their number one objective is to stop us, stop the Bernie movement.
I agree. I do not disagree with a word you said. We are in complete alignment with Nick's analysis and everything you just said. So I mean, we tried to get the superdelegates to vote for Bernie last time. And you're absolutely right. They'd rather lose to Trump than have Bernie Sanders take power of the executive branch of government. There's no question about that. We thought in 2016 that this was leveraged on the superdelegates. We went to Philadelphia. We held a press conference before they voted to endorse Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton in 2016. We held a rally before they voted. We had a billboard up between the airport and downtown Philadelphia that said, nominate Sanders or lose in November. And they ignored it because they'd rather lose to Donald Trump than have Bernie. We absolutely agree with that. So you're right. Our leverage this time around, we know, is focused on one group of Democrats. That is the rank and file voters, people who are coming over to the Democratic Party to vote this time around, people who vote in open primaries in the Democratic side. So we have a more advanced approach this time around than we had last time. Last time we had a pledge. That was it. This time we have what we call an Independent Revolutionary Integrated Strategy, or IRIS. It's independent because we're not connected to any campaign, right? We're independent. We're just an organization that we will support Bernie unless he loses the nomination, and then we'll support a Green Party candidate or a Socialist Party. So we're independent. We're revolutionary by the fact that we're going to vote for a progressive. Used to be progressives were mainstream. 100 years ago, or 110 years ago or so, 3 of the 4 candidates for president were progressive. But these days, because of the onslaught, because this country's been taken over by neoliberals, progressives has become a revolutionary ideology. So in the general election, we'll be voting progressive. That's revolutionary. The integrated strategy has to do with the fact that we have the pledge. We also have a bumper sticker that says BernieOrBust.info. We want to get that in front of as many drivers, Democrats, in the suburbs, in the cities, in the rural areas as we possibly can. And you can go to BernieOrBust.info and find a link to the bumper sticker. It's not hard to find. And help convey to Democrats this whole strategy of Bernie or bust, right? We didn't have a bumper sticker last time. We didn't have an outreach like we have this time. BernieOrBust.info is one of our 2 websites. It's not where you take the pledge, although there is a link to the pledge website. BernieOrBust.info is where we describe our book, which explains leverage. It explains why we need a revolution in the United States, and it explains how, within the confines of a 2-party system, using political leverage, electoral leverage, how we can execute a peaceful revolution in the United States. So we have an integrated strategy of the book, which we're not trying to sell 1 million copies of the book. We're trying to sell 100,000 copies of the book, in which 3 times we ask people to share this book. We want this book read 1 million times or 10 million times between now and when the primaries start in 6-7 months. So the book, the bumper sticker, and the Bernie or Bust pledge represent an integrated strategy that strengthens the overall idea, Bernie or Bust, into a more coherent approach that we're taking this time around.
Sure. So let me just ask you something, because you have a sort of a list of questions that we can ask you, listed on your page. And, those are kind of questions like, who do you blame for the 2016 Hillary Clinton loss? And, what if Bernie or Bust backfires? And, like I said, I did not vote for Hillary last time. So I've had those questions asked of me 1 million times. I'm sure you've had those questions asked for you. But you mentioned, you said only Bernie can sort of bring about this sort of mass mobilization. And it's one of the reasons why I support the Bernie campaign so much, is because he talks about the need for a mass movement and a sort of political revolution, as he brands it. But I mean, what I would say, I guess what I would ask is, and this is sort of a weird question, but like, assuming he's not the nominee, right? is the course of action, like you guys mentioned that you'll be writing in candidates or voting for, third party candidates. Have you guys coalesced behind a specific candidate or third party, or is there any organization trying to push for that? And like, what do you say to people in swing states, right? Because and I'll get to why I'm asking this question in a second, but I want to give you a chance to answer that first.
Sure. Well, like 2016, Bernie or Bust remains a 50-state strategy. We're not screwing around here. This isn't playing. We are revolutionaries, and we include swing states because we want Democrats to understand in no uncertain terms that if Bernie Sanders is not the nominee, Trump will be reelected. We pledge so. We plan on campaigning against the neoliberal establishment Democrat between the DNC and the general election. And to answer the first part of your question, right now the pledge just says vote for a progressive third party candidate. Which one? It's up to the people taking the pledge. But we will conduct a poll after the DNC. I mean, if Bernie wins the nomination, we won't be conducting a poll. But if the Democrats screw him again, and we're going toward a third party candidate, we're going to want to coalesce around one of those third parties. So we will ask at that point in time, everybody who's taken the Bernie or Bust pledge, because we collect contact information, we will ask them, which third party candidate do you support? The Green, the Justice, or the Socialist Party candidate? And once all the Bernie or Busters decide which third party candidate we're going to coalesce around, then we will prepare ads, if we can raise enough money, ads for television and radio to support that third party candidate and attack the neoliberal Democrat to, again, reinforce this idea that if the Democrats want to defeat Donald Trump, they want to unite the Democratic Party. They want to unite the progressives, the Bernie or Busters, the Bernie or Trumpers, the poor people who will sit this next election out, just like they sat out 2016. If they want to defeat Trump, they unite around Bernie Sanders. Otherwise, from our perspective, revolt against plutocracy will be attacking the establishment neoliberal blue party candidate.
Okay, so thank you for answering that. So there are three basic reasons why I'm not Bernie or Bust. And again, I say this in full agreement with almost everything you've said so far. I know exactly where you guys are coming from. I was essentially with you last time, although I didn't proactively go and write in Bernie Sanders. So whether I've been excluded by technicality or something last time, I was more or less with you guys last time. There are three reasons really why I'm not this time. The first two are kind of boring. And the third one I think is worth talking about. The first is, and look, you don't have to tell me, why Joe Biden is horrible and why almost all of these Democrats are horrible. There's no one in this field as horrible as Hillary Clinton, in my opinion. All right. I think she was just a uniquely malevolent force in this country and in politics. And I don't want to bore my listeners by going through that. I could talk for an hour on that. Number two, Trump derangement syndrome, as you say you're qualified to talk about, I think is a real thing. I also think Trump derangement is a real thing. And I think a second Trump term is going to be much more dangerous than a Trump first term. All right. And I hate to repeat these sort of neoliberal talking points, but, he's gotten two justices on the court, one more, and we could see things really go to hell. So those are the kind of boring ones, right? There's no real need for me to explain those, I don't think. The third one, though, is really the main reason why I am not Bernie or Bust at this point. And the third one is because I do think progressives have some momentum going right now. And I would like to see that momentum have a chance, ostensibly at least, to actually influence policy. So 4 years ago, when Hillary Clinton was the nominee, right, if she had won the presidency, the progressive, revolution, if you want to call it that, would have been dead. They would have said, look, you had your chance at this political revolution. Bernie ran. He did better than people thought, but he lost. We squashed it. And our belief in the sort of neoliberal status quo has been validated by the fact that Hillary Clinton won a resounding victory against Donald Trump. And so, you guys can take your signs and go back home. Now that she lost and that the sort of Bernie wing of the party and and I don't even want to talk in terms of the party because I don't really care about the Democratic Party, but so the Bernie movement stayed strong. We have people like AOC in Congress now, the squad that's been in the news, lately. Those people weren't there 4 years ago. And so 4 years ago, Clinton wins, all this stuff is dead. They just voted on a House bill to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. There is no way on earth that would have happened were Hillary Clinton president right now. Partly because we wouldn't have had the momentum behind these ideas. They would have been deemed, invalid, right, by the powers that be. And number two, now that Donald Trump is president, right, all of these Democrats voted for this $15 minimum wage bill because they know they're not going to actually have to put their money where their mouth is as long as there's a Republican Senate and Donald Trump in the White House. So I would like to get, even if it's the worst, most horrible Democratic president in the race right now, I'd like to get them in there, because if we get a Democrat in the White House and we can maybe flip the Senate, and we might have to wait 2 more years to flip the Senate since the Senate map is shit for Democrats this time, then we could really get these people, many of whom are, neoliberals, centrists, sort of corporate candidates, on record as like, okay, now we actually have a chance to pass a $15 minimum wage. Now, which ones of you assholes are going to actually vote for it and actually say, and then we could get these people on record. And then the people who don't, now we could go after them in a meaningful way, because now we actually have a chance to implement this shit. And if you screw us this time, we're going to come after you in the form of primaries, in the form of perhaps third-party candidates. I mean, I think the movement for a People's Party is a necessary thing, but I think one way to maximize leverage in a way is to set up a system in which we can actually implement policy so that, number one, we may actually be able to do it, which is, of course, our goal, right? But number two, we get a crystal clear vision of who is actually with us and who is not.
Well, we got that in 2016 when certain Democrats endorsed Hillary Clinton and those who endorsed Bernie Sanders. That's on our website under the neoliberal tab. But there's another concern here that you're not taking into account, and it's something that we elaborate on a great extent in our book, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's in the current Democratic Party platform. That thing hasn't died. It's just sleeping while Donald Trump is in the White House. That agreement, that so-called free trade agreement, first of all, it's not your grandfather's free trade agreement. It's not just lowering tariffs and prohibiting manipulation of currency. In fact, that's not even in there. What it is an unprecedented, historically unprecedented corporate power grab that designed to regulate regulators. It's designed to handcuff our representatives in Congress, in state legislatures, even local legislatures, so they cannot regulate transnational corporations operating in their state, in their country, in their county, in their city. This is a top to bottom corporate coup. And if you elect any of these neoliberals, from Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, any one of these Clinton-aligned Democrats, you're going to end up with a corporate hellscape as a result of this so-called free trade agreement. It's by free trade, they're using that term as a Trojan horse to impose corporate dystopia on the United States. So that's what you're not taking into consideration, and very, very few people do.
No. I mean, look, I
understand what's in that agreement.
No, well, you put emphasis on that, and look, I think you're right, and I think that first of all, I think Joe Biden's going to have a very hard time on trade in the Midwest should he be the nominee. I think Trump could hammer him harder on that than he hammered Hillary, because Trump is now an incumbent, and Trump is going to be able to say to these people, I fixed our economy, I fixed our trade deals, and now he's going to take it back. So I agree there are huge weaknesses there, and look, I agree. I mean, we've done a few different shows on this podcast that talk about the sort of urgent need for Medicare for all, right? And the fact that even under this, even under Obamacare, you have, we did an episode on insulin where people are paying $900 a month for insulin, and people are putting GoFundMe campaigns online and dying because they don't raise enough money in the period of time to get their next insulin check or to get their next insulin. I mean, it's just absolutely obscene. And I agree that Joe Biden and a lot of these neoliberals would be a continuation of that. And I think that's a horrible thing. So, I mean, look, I agree with you on that. But at the same time, and look, TPP is a kind of unique thing because Trump has voiced opposition to TPP. Trump killed TPP, right? But in your mind, does that issue, no pun intended, trump all other reasons not to try to get a Democrat in the White House? For the reasons I mentioned, right? I'm not trying to browbeat you, right? I'm not one of these Democrats who... I get that,
and I'm very close to agreeing with you, except for some of these characteristics in the TPP. So let me go back and talk about one of these other issues that it doesn't appear to trump, which is climate change, climate collapse. If Donald Trump is reelected, we're doomed as a species. Our focus this time around is climate preservation, and as a result of the IPCC report from last year, which announced that we have 12 years to reduce carbon emissions by 50% worldwide, or else we're going to cross a threshold and we'll be in an environment, a climate of increasingly faster and faster global warming, runaway global warming. So that issue would trump the reasoning behind the Trans-Pacific Partnership, except the Trans-Pacific Partnership contains, among many of its other bad qualities or characteristics, a provision where ports that are built for exporting of liquid natural gas, which comes from fracking, don't even need to be inspected, don't even need to be approved. They have automatic approval for these things built into the TPP. So this trade agreement, it would be such a disaster for every aspect of human life other than social issues like gay marriage and praying in school, and all those things, of course, are not included in the agreement. But all the important economic issues, this agreement would send this country to hell in a handbasket. So will the re-election of Donald Trump for different reasons, primarily the climate. So we're in a situation in 2020 where we're facing human extinction with the re-election of Donald Trump, or the election of an establishment Democrat. And sure, there's other things that you come into consideration, like Medicare for all and so forth. But Bernie Sanders is going to have much longer coattails for the reasons I've already explained, getting poor people and poorly educated people and Bernie or Trumpers all behind his candidacy. So you'll get more progressives elected to Congress. You'll get more progressive senators elected to the Senate. He'll have larger coattails.
Oh, you don't have to convince me he's the best candidate. I agree he's the best candidate.
So what we're facing with Bernie or bust is the equivalent of revolution or extinction. The neoliberals aren't going to avoid extinction because they're too in bed with transnational corporations. They just are. They are going to abide by and endorse and push Wall Street's agenda. We've learned that from Clinton. We've learned that from Obama. We don't need to keep relearning the same lesson over and over again. The enemies of progress in this country are fascists who associated with Donald Trump and neoliberals associated with the Democratic Party establishment. We
I
don't
agree with
want a revolution. We need a revolution. So the
I agree with
idea that any blue will do just to get rid of Trump is basically saying, I want an arrow in the back rather than a gunshot to the chest.
I understand. I understand precisely what you're saying. But so what do you make of the idea that let's just, I don't know, pick one. Go ahead. You pick one of the neoliberal candidates if they become president. Go ahead. Just say a name.
Buttigieg.
All right, Buttigieg. So if Buttigieg becomes president, what do you make of the idea that we still have some momentum going, that we could get bills to his desk that he would then have to sign? That seems to me like more leverage than just saying, look, the human race is going to go extinct no matter who wins, Trump or Buttigieg. Right. I mean, what do you make of this idea that, like, OK, you know, we have progressives being elected. Hopefully we can get a new crop of them. And by the way, you know, that is a hugely possible thing. So, you know, and I don't think people quite realize how possible it is to primary out these corporate Democrats. AOC won her primary with 15,000 votes. And she was actually very smart. She was very perceptive because these primary elections are low turnout races. And a lot of grassroots progressives would be like, well, if nobody turns out, then, you know, it kind of creates this sort of depression. But she took the opposite. She's like, well, if it's a low turnout election, I don't have to mobilize 500,000 people to win. I can mobilize 15,000 people, and I'm the next congresswoman from New York's 14th, and I'm a superstar. And she is. And, you know, as much as Nancy Pelosi wants to say that these four women are only four people and that's how much influence they have, that's obviously not true. And I wrote a piece on this on my blog. I mean, that's obviously not the case. They obviously have great influence beyond that. And if we could just get even another half a dozen of these Congress people elected in 2020 and then build on that, it could be an exponential thing because now these people start endorsing each other and we build real power. I think, and I don't want to start repeating myself, but if we have the personnel in place where the Democrats are forced to now go on record, we now have the power to change things, the power to implement all of these things, right? We get them on the record as to who's for it and who's not. Now, TPP, yeah, I mean, that's a very disconcerting thing. I mean, I agree with you, but I don't know if I quite buy that means extinction in 4 to 8 years. In other words, could we course correct? I mean, I don't know if I buy the just how dire you're saying that is as a reason to just say we're going to vote for a third party.
Yeah, well, that's not coming from me. That's coming from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They're the ones who said we have 12 years, and the extinction event won't be in 12 years or so. We're looking at between now and the end of the century.
No, I understand, but they're saying we have 12 years to course correct.
Right. We have to make this correction within the next 12 years. And I would argue that in the next administration, the next 4 years after, from 2021 to 2025, that's when we've got to get this thing turned around, or it's just going to be too late. And I don't think we're going to get it turned around unless we can replace the Republicans in the Senate. We have to eliminate Mitch McConnell as majority leader. Mm-hmm. And again, I go back to Bernie Sanders is the one who's going to have the coattails to make that happen in 2020 and certainly again in 2022. Because then if Bernie Sanders is the president, he'll have the bully pulpit to help get more progressives elected to the Senate and to the House.
I think he has the bully pulpit now.
Is our only hope for human survival at this point. That's how we frame this particular election. If it's not Bernie Sanders, you're going to get a Buttigieg, and sure, you might be able to get a little bit of progressive legislation here or there and find out who's progressive and who's with the corporations for lower wages and whatnot. But that's not going to matter if we don't get this energy carbon emissions turned around in the next administration. I think by 2024 we'll be too far down the road, whether it's under a neoliberal or under a neo-fascist, to get control of this thing. I just think it's possible it won't be too late, but most climate scientists are giving us 12 years or even less at this point. And I think the next administration, the next 4 year, or the next executive branch administration will be the point of no return. If we get another neoliberal in there pushing fracking and so forth, we're doomed. If we keep Donald Trump, we're doomed. I don't mean doomed in the next 4 to 8 or 10 or 20 years. I mean down the road after this runaway climate or global warming really accelerates, then we'll start having, massive food failures and starvation and massive climate or population immigration and so forth. It'll be a complete disaster, and it's already underway. I know I don't have to convince you it's happening, but there are people who do need to be convinced. And what they don't quite grasp is that Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard, by the way, she is a plan B. If for any reason Bernie Sanders drops out of this race, we seamlessly switch from Bernie or bust to Tulsi or trash the Democratic Party. But these progressives have the political philosophy necessary to mobilize the federal government the way Roosevelt mobilized the federal government to win World War II. It takes a progressive to mobilize a federal government in a way to transform the energy sector and capture carbon. There's not going to be an awful lot of business opportunities in carbon capture, although there will be some. And I think we need a market and demand economy, both integrated approach. We can't close our mind to people making money by pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and using it to make not plastic bags, but carbon bags or carbon rope, or reusing this thing and selling it in the marketplace. But that's not going to happen under a neoliberal. It just isn't. We're getting lip service from Joe Biden. He's going to spend what, $6 billion or $6 trillion on climate change technologies and so forth, carbon capture. But we just don't trust him. I mean, the problem is candidates for office will say anything they think you need to hear.
Oh, sure. No, look, I don't.
But look at their record. Don't forget what candidates are saying. What have they been doing their entire life? Biden, and I disagree with you about this. Biden is as bad, if not worse, than Hillary Clinton. He's more friendly. He's a better politician than she is. But policy-wise, he's just as bad, if not worse, than Hillary Clinton. He called the Trans-Pacific Partnership glowingly a new world order, and he wasn't lying. It would be a new corporate crafted world order. So he's just as bad as, or if not worse, than Hillary Clinton. And these other neoliberals are not much better because they don't have the political philosophy of mobilizing the government the way progressives do. So think of Bernie or bust as progressive or bust,
Sure.
Progressive or extinction. It's going to happen if we don't mobilize the government in a way that only a progressive can.
I agree with you, but do we need to have someone in the executive branch in order to achieve that mobilization? I mean, I think Bernie has a bully pulpit right now. And one of my favorite things about the Bernie campaign is the organizing that he does, right? I mean, he'll go into the Walmart boardroom and say, why don't you pay your wages more? And then at the end of that, he'll have a couple executives come out and call for a higher minimum wage. I mean, he is doing things in a way that are mobilizing mass groups of people. And look, I'm with you. I want him to be president, right? I really want him to be president. But I'm saying in the event that he is not the nominee, that mobilization still continues. And I think that's one of the great things about his campaign is that he's building a movement that sort of transcends electoral politics. And so, I mean, look, I agree with just about, I mean, everything you're saying, which is that, yeah, I mean, these other candidates mostly suck. They're horrible. But I'm not to the point where I'm saying it's not worth getting them elected anyway to get Donald Trump out of office, get this just blatant climate denial out of office. I mean, Donald Trump is the worst president we've had on climate change, I think. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. and try to as best we can, and it's not an ideal circumstance by any means. I mean, I 100% agree with you on that, but I think we can apply pressure without necessarily having someone in the executive branch. Now, obviously, it's leaps and bounds better to have someone on our side in that Oval Office, right? I mean, nobody could deny that, but I question whether or not it's worth saying, okay, we're going to vote for a third party if we don't have that person in the Oval Office, precisely because I think there's momentum outside the Oval Office now, where 4 years ago there wasn't.
Well, the one thing I would disagree with you on is that you want Bernie Sanders to win the election. We need Bernie Sanders. That's the bone of contention that we're discussing right now. You want Sanders, but you're willing to put up with any one of these neoliberals.
Well, no. Hold on. I'm not willing to put up with them. I'm willing to. What I'm willing to do is I'm willing to, in other words, create a sort of higher stakes ultimatum, which is to say, okay, you're president now. Which one of you assholes who voted for the $15 minimum wage when you knew it could never happen now? Who's going to vote for it? Because there are people in Congress who attacked Bernie just relentlessly in 2016 with the socialist moniker, right? Who really were just saying, this guy's a socialist, he'll never win, he's a socialist, the redistribution of wealth doesn't work, blah, 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 da, da, da. And now those same people are now bragging that they support this $15 minimum wage bill. And I'm just using this because it's a recent example, right? And so, look, I don't trust them. I know you don't trust them.
Right.
But there's no way to verify unless we actually have a way to actually get this implemented. You're a New Yorker. I'm a New Yorker. We come from different parts of the state, but the New York Health Act is a perfect example. I don't know how closely you've followed that. And I haven't followed it that closely. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on it. But once the IDC was voted out in 2018, and we actually had people who expressed a firm commitment to a sort of Medicare for all type system for New York State, once we got those people in, and now this was a real possibility of passing, all of a sudden a lot of support collapsed, because now it's not just a symbolic stance. Now we actually get to see who's serious about doing this and who's not. And I think as part of this progressive revolution, we need to get people on the record when it comes to that question. And then, as Bernie says, the struggle continues. And I think there are people outside the Democratic Party doing great work. I think you're one of them. I think Nick Brana is one of them. I think there is this great groundswell of progressivism that can have real influence. And the fact that we have to, to borrow your phrase, put up with the fact that one of these assholes becomes president who we don't like. I mean, I don't want to get semantical and say okay, I really want Bernie or we need Bernie. What we need in this country is radical systemic reform. That is what we need. If Bernie is the candidate, yes. If Bernie is the candidate who can deliver that, then yes. I mean, we need someone like him, and he's really the only guy talking in these terms now, in that office. But, what if it fails, right? If that fails, I'm not willing to say that we are extinct with Biden and extinct with Trump. All right. I'm not even willing to say we're extinct with Trump, but it's pretty fucking bad. And Biden is pretty fucking bad too. But I think we have momentum where we can still influence change if we have the pieces in place, and then we will know for sure. If we can't, now it's time for a third party. And I think, and I told Nick Brana this and Carol Early when I met with them, they were in town for Left Forum. I said the work you guys are doing is indispensable. We're going to need eventually some structure that is not the Democratic Party. Because the fact that you and I are having this debate, this back and forth, this is kind of a waste of time that shouldn't be there, right? We should have a viable party that actually represents working people, environmental issues, right? Social justice, racial justice issues in a serious way, so that we don't have to argue, well, what if Bernie's not the nominee? Then what do we do? This is a waste of time to a certain extent. And so I do think, after this election, either way, unless Bernie wins, right? Unless he wins, if Biden becomes president, I think work on a viable third party begins that very next day. And I shouldn't say even begins, because it's already begun. But I think massive energy has to be put into that. And in Biden's case, don't forget, Biden will be taking office at the age of what, 78, something like that. There's going to be real speculation that Biden might not even seek a second term because of how old he is, which
Or
makes and that alone, or Bernie, but I'm saying in Biden's case, that very doubt makes him vulnerable to a primary challenge. Now, if Kamala Harris wins, you ain't going to primary her, right? Buttigieg wins, you ain't going to primary him. But if Biden wins, just the fact that there's going to be this question of whether or not he even seeks a second term makes him more vulnerable to a primary. And I think we keep this momentum going and we try as hard as we can. So that's kind of where I am. But
where I take issue with that and the whole analysis is going back to what I've already argued. Only Bernie Sanders can defeat Donald Trump. Biden's going to be creamed by Trump for a whole variety of reasons. But even someone like Kamala Harris, she doesn't have support of poor people. She doesn't have support of Bernie or Trumpers. She doesn't have support of Bernie or Busters. She doesn't have support of poorly educated people. She's not going to win unless, and I'll have this one caveat, because the economy's technically doing well, unemployment is low, inflation's low, and growth is fairly good, better than it was under Obama. If the economy crashes, if the stock market crashes between now and the general election, then all bets are off. Any one of these Democrats could probably defeat Trump in that circumstance. But otherwise, Biden's not going to get elected. Harris is not going to get elected. People are not going to come out to support these centrists anymore. That's what we need to stress over and over again. It's not just, oh, we want Bernie, but we'll put up with it. They're not going to defeat Trump.
What about Elizabeth Warren? I have to ask you that because that's
of the stock market. No one can mathematically defeat Trump other than Bernie Sanders, possibly Tulsi Gabbard, but right now she doesn't have the social democratic reputation. She doesn't have the massive army of volunteers. She doesn't have in place what Bernie has in place. He's clearly the one candidate best positioned to defeat Donald Trump, and I would argue the only one who's going to get the support from these four categories of voters that I've already previously laid out. None of these neoliberals are going to win election. As I forget his name. He's a surrogate. Cornel West has argued in publications. The bottom has fallen out from beneath the center. There's very little support among the voters these days for neoliberals. So if a neoliberal is nominated by the Democrats, if the establishment wants to keep control of their party and interfere with the elections like they did last time with voter suppression in multiple states, they actually infiltrated Bernie's campaign. Nico House covered this in North Carolina. That's how he sort of became known around the country, because he was blowing the whistle that somebody in the DNC or the Clinton campaign had infiltrated Bernie's campaign specifically to sabotage. They pull any of this bullshit again this time and get themselves a neoliberal, they're going to lose the election. Not only because of poor people, but the Bernie or busters, and we are nearly 50,000 people already this time around because we had leftovers from last time. We're going to pledge to defeat these neoliberals. So the neoliberal will be attacked from the left and, of course, from Trump. They just mathematically don't have the numbers and support from the people in the center, the independents, who look at what's going on with the economy and look at what the neoliberals have been doing with so-called trade agreements over the last, when did NAFTA come, in the 90s? NAFTA was passed. So over the last 30 years, we know what these agreements do to the American people. And that's why I think Hillary Clinton lost. What Bill Clinton did with NAFTA, they were afraid she was going to do with the TPP, and they were right. So they swung over to Trump and saved the United States from this imposition of corporate order. I can't stress this enough. I cover this 6 different ways throughout the course of Bernie or Bust Pioneers of Electoral Revolt. This so-called process of corporatization of everything, this neoliberal philosophy, is destroying this republic. And believe it or not, Trump voters in 2016 rescued the Republic. Sure, his Supreme Court nominees are horrible, and if he gets a third one in there, we'll set this country back to the 50s and the 40s for a long, long time. But the argument is that that's better than going forward into this corporate dystopia that is on the current Democratic Party platform, this Trans-Pacific Partnership. This is a much greater threat than you're giving credit for. And it makes neoliberal Democrats more of a threat to the climate, to democratic order, to everything but the Supreme Court than even Donald Trump. He's worse on the Supreme Court than the neoliberal Democrats would be, certainly. But on the whole, the big picture, it's very close one way or the other as to who would be more dangerous. And
So
again, go ahead.
no, once again, I don't totally disagree with this. And 4 years ago, when there was no momentum for the ideas we're talking about now, I would have been in lockstep with you. Right. I mean, and so, you know, I understand where you're coming from. I do. It's one of the reasons why I wanted you to come on, and one of the reasons why I think this conversation was really good. So I just have one final question, I guess, for you. And this is I'm just asking out of curiosity, because I myself am very ambivalent about this. But you've mentioned all these other candidates. You have not mentioned Elizabeth Warren yet. What's your opinion of her, and where does she factor into this? Because she's doing very well now.
She's doing all right, almost as well as Bernie. Well, she made her position very clear. And again, we cover this in the book when we talk about Elizabeth Warren. We disagreed with, in the course of writing this book, we disagreed with Caitlin Johnstone. She's a very progressive, revolutionary writer out of Australia.
Yep, I know her work very well.
She deemed Warren back then as a neoliberal, and I disagreed with that at that time. But now I've come around to agree with Caitlin Johnstone. Warren is a pseudo-progressive. She's more liberal than most of the neoliberals, but she's not a real progressive. And she made that very clear when she endorsed the neoliberal Hillary Clinton. So this is what's obviously portrayed on our website under the neoliberal tab, where you can see who endorsed, who affiliated with. This isn't guilt by association. This is neoliberalism by affiliation from 2016. Elizabeth Warren not only endorsed Hillary Clinton, voted for Hillary Clinton, she was a Clinton superdelegate. She is a neoliberal. Caitlin Johnstone's right about that. So she would be better than someone like Biden or Kamala Harris, but until she spells out her position on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I just don't trust her. I don't trust her because of her track record. I don't trust her because, you know, when she came out and said, I'm a capitalist, that's a red flag for us. We want a progressive. That doesn't necessarily mean democratic socialist, but it means someone willing to take on the transnational corporations in a way that Warren won't or doesn't seem to be willing to. The big banks she's challenging. Another problem with Warren is she's going to lose. Donald Trump will eat her alive. And I feel kind of creepy explaining why.
I know. I think I know where you're going with this.
But she talks in a way that's not presidential. She nods her head. She speaks with a head nod.
Well, look, I mean, she is a politician. That is, I think, what
behavior, and people are going to pick up on that. So I feel, like I said, I feel creepy pointing that out because she should be able to speak any way she wants to speak and win election. But voters are kind of superficial, and I think Trump is just going to eat her alive in some part, and she's doing it herself. No one's telling her to nod her head when she speaks, but it just looks funny, and it's not presidential. And I think it's going to hurt her, like the rest of the neoliberals.
Let me just go on record by saying
Donald Trump, barring a collapse of the stock market.
I have to say, when I said I think I know where you're going with this, I want to correct myself. I had no idea where you're going with it. I did not think that her head nodding was not anywhere on my radar. No, but I think I generally agree that she is a weaker candidate, precisely because A, Trump has already been able to brand her with this Pocahontas shit, and B, she does come off not only to Republicans but to Democrats and progressives like us as a politician, right? I mean, she made. I mean, and the decision to endorse Clinton in that primary and to really sit out most of the fight um, was it really indicates that she is a calculating politician who has really triangulated herself within the Democratic Party so that she has appealed to progressives and the centrist neoliberal wing. And that's one of the reasons why this race has now gotten kind of complicated, is because she's appealing to both of those camps. And as the race becomes more volatile, it's unclear whether they'll stay with her or not. And if they don't stay with her, it's unclear as to where else they will go. And so I think Warren is extremely complicated. And I was, of course, totally disgusted with her silence during that primary. And the major critique I have of her, and this is why I say she's a politician, I mean, she has a million slogans now with the plans for everything and all that stuff, right? But the one slogan that she had is what did she say? Like, believe in something and fight for it. Except she doesn't fight. She fights for it when she's running for office, right? Yeah. I mean, she had an opportunity to fight for it 4 years ago, and she was AWOL. And that not only demonstrates a sort of duplicitousness on her part, but it demonstrates a lack of commitment and a lack of political leadership.
That's
right?
Not the C word we would use. We think we saw this as a lack of courage. And the last thing you want in a commander in chief is a lack of spine. We refer to her profile in cowardice, in how she behaved in 2016. And that's going to come up. I mean, people are, I don't know if Bernie's going to point it out because of the fact that she basically stabbed him in the back. But
I don't want to frame this in terms of sour grapes.
Right? Now he calls her extremely cowardice, and we think she's a coward. So it's going to come out, and whether her supporters swing toward the neoliberal or toward Bernie or another progressive is yet to be decided. But part of that will come from who is most liked. And there's a recent poll, I can't remember who did it, that shows the most liked candidate by Democrats, who is liked by the Democrats, is Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren was way down on that list.
Yes, she was. So I think I know what poll you're referring to. Bernie was up at 72%, and Warren was at, I think, 59%, right? And that 72% number for Bernie is so revealing, because if you study politics the way I do, and I study these elections very closely, I always tell my friends my interest in politics is derivative of my interest in baseball, right? I love numbers games where stats and everything you get to follow. That 72% number for Bernie Sanders means 28% of the party doesn't like him. 28% is exactly half of the vote share that Hillary Clinton got in those 2016 primaries. And that makes total sense, because there were a lot of Hillary voters last time who liked Bernie, but, you know, because of different influences and different priorities, they decided Hillary was the candidate. I know a lot of them. I'm friends with many of them. There are half of the Hillary Clinton supporters who despised him with every fiber of their being. And they still do. And that's the 28%. It is one half of the Hillary Clinton vote that just has it in for this guy. And it's revealing just how irrational, or not even irrational, but just it is revealing their sort of it says something about their motivation. It says something about their priorities, that even after the party is trying to ape his platform, they're still hating him, right? So it's like the House votes now overwhelmingly for a $15 minimum wage. Like, it's one thing if you're going to make the case that this is a pie-in-the-sky socialist who doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, and that's why we don't like him, because his policies don't make sense. But now the party is trying their best to cozy up to his policy agenda. So if you're now getting closer to him on policy, why do you still fucking hate him so much? And I think the reason they hate him so much is because A, there are a lot of people who feel like he blew it for Hillary, which, you know, we could talk about that.
That was our job.
Yeah, right, exactly. And B, you know, I think the sort of Democratic establishment doesn't like him for the simple reason that he's not one of them. He's not a Democrat, right? He's not part of the structure that, quite frankly, gives them their livelihood and their
Right.
living, right?
Right.
And Elizabeth
Not
Warren
me,
is. Right. And Warren is. So even though Warren can get closer to him on policy, she's so much more palatable to that establishment structure because she is part of it.
Right.
And he is not.
That's
Right?
correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what? We're running low on time here, but I would love to actually have you back on a couple times throughout this race because we talked a lot about strategy and a lot of this is based on sort of trying to predict how things are going to go. And I would love to get to talk to you again at different times throughout this race, during the primaries and after the primaries, to just see how everything plays out and how we sort of maneuver that. So if you would be willing to come back, I'd love to have you back. And it was great to talk to you. Do you have any other things you need to get in? You talk about your book and where people can find you and follow you?
Yeah, just stress again, it's burnyorbust.info. From there, there's an opening video that will explain sort of the layout of the book, or layout not only of the book, but the website and how to find the other website, how to click, take the pledge, how to get their hands on the bumper sticker, why it's important to share this book with other Democrats, and a little bit at the end of this opening video about myself. What is my educational background and so forth, because I think it's important for people to understand, you know, who the hell's Victor Tiffany. So I appreciate this time, this opportunity to discuss this. I'd love to come back and talk about this some more during the primaries and after the convention. Hopefully, we'll be dealing with the nominee Bernie Sanders versus the fascist Donald Trump. I think that would make a great contrast, a democratic socialist versus a neo-fascist. And I think it's pretty clear that Democrats will unite behind Bernie Sanders. The problem, the poor people will come out for Bernie Sanders. The problem will be the clueless, muddled class, the independents who don't like Democrats, they don't like Republicans. Hopefully they'll stay home and not vote for Donald Trump. But you know, people are so vulnerable to propaganda that's a wild card. As I said in the essay, that only Bernie Sanders can defeat Donald Trump. That's not a guarantee that he will defeat Donald Trump. It's just that he's the only one who can bring in the poor people, the Bernier Trumpers, the Bernier Busters, and so forth. So yeah, I look forward to talking with you again sometime.
Absolutely, yeah. There's so much that we still have to get into, and so every time you talk, I'm tempted to prolong the conversation because there's so much that I feel we need to talk about. But we will talk again in the future. And Victor, Tiffany, thank you so much for making the time. I'm just going to do my little outro wrap here, so just hang on the line after I stop here. But
thanks for having.
Oh. No problem at all. It was thank you for reaching out, and I'm so glad we could do this. You could like us on Facebook. You could follow us on SoundCloud. Please subscribe to the podcast. We're on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn Radio. You can find us on all of those platforms. We now have, I'm proud to announce, a Patreon page where for just $0.10 a day, you can support this program and get access to exclusive content. There are different tiers where for $8 a month, that's $0.25 a day, 25 cents a day, you can get exclusive audio content and access to our Q&A blogs and podcasts where you guys can submit questions and we will answer them. We'll start once a month, and then if we grow it and we get more patrons and more questions, we'll start doing them more regularly than that. But thank you guys so much for your support. It really means so much. And this has been a great ride. We just launched this Patreon page if you would like to support this program. So Victor, Tiffany, once again, thank you so much for coming on. We will see you all next time. Okay, so I'm just going to stop this recording. Just hang on the line for 1 minute.
Revolt Against Plutocracy won't just be covering the news about the necessary revolution in the United States. Sometimes will be making the news. If you want to stay on top of the revolutionary actions and strategies of grassroots, genuine progressives, and our allies, please subscribe to our YouTube channel today.